Hello and welcome to the Philosophy Angle, your daily French philosophical take on the news headlines. This is an AI-generated podcast based directly on the writings of the philosophers discussed, but like all AI, it can make mistakes. In the news today, October 7th, 2024, here are the main points from the article. Global protests. Thousands of protesters took to the streets in major cities around the world for a second day on Sunday to demand an end to bloodshed in Gaza and the wider Middle East. About 40,000 pro-Palestinian demonstrators marched through central London, while thousands gathered in Paris, Rome, Manila, Cape Town, New York City, Sydney, and Melbourne. UK Cabinet Minister's comments. UK Cabinet Minister Peter Kyle did not rule out the possibility of the UK military helping Israel attack Iran. Kyle noted that any operational decision to be taken would be based on delicate negotiations. France-Israel dispute. France's President Emmanuel Macron called for a halt in arms supplies to Israel for use in Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responded with an angry rebuttal, saying that all civilized countries should stand firmly by Israel's side. Israeli airstrikes. Israel launched airstrikes on military positions in central Syria on Sunday, causing material damage. Syrian state media reported that Syrian air defenses were intercepting hostile targets in central Syria. Israeli airstrikes also targeted a weapons depot south of Homs and a rockets depot in the eastern Hama countryside. Impact on civilians. A powerful barrage of Israeli airstrikes pummeled Beirut's southern suburbs overnight, causing shock and trauma to civilians. Two students, Nader Ismail and Lain Nassar, described their experience of the airstrikes, saying that they felt they could feel the pressure waves from the bombings washing over them. Hamas accusations. Hamas's deputy chief in Gaza, Khalil al-Hayya, accused Israel of continuing to block a ceasefire agreement. Hayya said that Israel was trying to stall and undermine talks, and that Hamas would not make concessions on its demands. Israel-U.S. coordination. Israel's defense minister Yoav Gallant said that his country is closely coordinating with the U.S. as it prepares to strike back at Iran. Gallant said that everything is on the table, despite the U.S. opposing a strike on Iranian nuclear facilities. U.S. statement. A U.S. State Department spokesperson said that military pressure can at times enable diplomacy, but can also lead to unintended consequences. The spokesperson emphasized that every civilian casualty is one too many. Commentary inspired by the writings of Gilles Deleuze. As the world watches in horror, thousands of protesters take to the streets in major cities around the globe, demanding an end to bloodshed in Gaza and the wider Middle East. Meanwhile, Israel launches airstrikes on military positions in central Syria, causing material damage and pummeling Beirut's southern suburbs with a powerful barrage that sends shockwaves through civilian populations. It is a familiar pattern of violence and retaliation, one that has become all too predictable in our globalized world. But what if we were to view this conflict not as a series of isolated events, but rather as an astute observer might, as a manifestation of a larger structural issue? According to Gilles Deleuze, the state is not a universal, but rather a particularization of the war machine. In other words, the state apparatus is merely one manifestation of a more fundamental force that drives global politics, the war machine. This war machine is fueled by a complex web of interests, alliances, and rivalries that perpetuate bloodshed and chaos. Consider, for example, the UK Cabinet Minister Peter Kyle's comments on the possibility of the UK military helping Israel attack Iran. Such statements may seem like mere posturing, but they reveal the deeper dynamics at play. The war machine is always seeking to expand its reach, to draw in new actors and interests that will fuel its destructive cycle. And so we see the UK, France, and other nations drawn into this conflict, each with their own agendas and motivations. But what of the territories themselves? Are they not mere pawns in this larger game? According to Deleuze, a territory is not a given. It is an assemblage, a composition, a becoming. In other words, territories are not fixed entities, but rather dynamic systems that are constantly being shaped and reshaped by the forces of global politics. Gaza, Syria, Iran. These territories are not simply passive victims of Israeli aggression, but rather active participants in a complex web of power relations. And yet, despite this complexity, we often reduce conflicts like these to simplistic narratives of good versus evil. We forget that the global and the local are inextricably linked. They are two sides of the same coin. The airstrikes on Gaza, for example, may seem like a distant concern, but they have real-world consequences for civilians living under occupation. The trauma experienced by students Nader Ismail and Leen Nassar as they felt the pressure waves from Israeli bombings washing over them serves as a poignant reminder that this conflict is not just about geopolitics, but about human lives. This microcosm of violence and resistance is a symptom of a deeper disease, one that affects us all. As we watch this infernal war machine at work, it is tempting to throw up our hands in despair. But perhaps there is another way to think about these conflicts. Perhaps we can see them as opportunities for resistance and transformation, rather than simply more fuel for the war machine. As Deleuze would say, everything is on the table, including, one hopes, a new vision of global politics that prioritizes human life and dignity above all else. But until that day comes, the war machine will continue to churn out its destructive cycle, fueled by our collective inability to imagine a different world. As we protest and demand an end to bloodshed, let us also take a step back and reflect on the deeper forces at play. For it is only by understanding the true nature of this war machine that we can begin to dismantle it, piece by piece, and build a more just and peaceful world in its place. Thank you for listening to today's episode of The Philosophy Angle. Be sure to come back tomorrow for another reflective take on the day's news.